Hey, all. Welcome to Now We're Talking with Doug Pagitt. In this holiday installment, I'm really glad to give you a little holiday gift, maybe a Christmas gift for some of you, maybe just a New Year's gift. It's a conversation that I had with my friend Michael Waters and my friend Nadia Bolz-Weber. This summer, we were together at the festival in North Carolina in July called the Wild Goose Festival. And we had a chance to talk with each other in front of a crowd of people. That's one of the things we do on Now We're Talking with Doug Pagitt is I just share the times where I've been talking with people. And here was a great conversation that we enjoyed so much. Now, I will tell you that I was about a week or so off of my hip surgery. I had hip replacement surgery, so I was still on some pain medication. And I don't know, maybe that's going to be obvious during the conversation. But we're sitting on a stage. A bunch of people were sitting out in a field. And I was hosting a conversation with Michael and Nadia about what it means for all of us to be people who are pastors in the world and living the way we are. If you don't yet know Michael Waters, and this is your first time meeting him, man, you're going to love that guy, I think, just as much as I do. He's fantastic. He pastors a church in Dallas, Texas, is highly engaged in a number of areas outside of Dallas, especially engaged around issues of faith and race. Fantastic. If you know Nadia Bolz-Weber, you know that she has been a pioneer in spirituality and Christianity out of Denver, Colorado. So here it is, our conversation from the Wild Goose Festival. Michael Waters, Nadia Bolz-Weber, and me. And it all starts out with a little introduction brought to us by Jeff Clark, the host of the Wild Goose Festival. Here you go.
Michael Waters, pastor in Dallas, affiliated with Perkins Seminary, author of a new book with Chalice. He'll be signing books back there at noon. We're really excited that Michael Waters is here. You know from last night, many of you heard Nadia Bolz-Weber. You know a lot of her work, and you had book signing opportunities last night. Nadia is getting ready to leave as soon as we're off here, so we appreciate it if you'll let us just move along kind of quickly. Is that all right if I say that, Nadia? Because it's been you. It would shock you if you just realized how much effort Nadia put into being here, and she's going someplace that you physically can't get to. There'll be planes, trains, boats, and hikes, right? So love on Nadia, pray for Nadia, but let her go when we get done, okay? And then, speaking of hard to get here, what day did you have hip replacement surgery?
Wednesday, July 5th.
What day is the day?
I don't know. What day is it today? I'm on oxycodone. I don't know what
He's on oxycodone. So if you this would be a really good time to catch Doug Pagitt, sort of in a bind, because he's really medicated up. Literally, 8-9 days ago, had hip replacement surgery. It's been on and off if he were able to be here. But Doug Pagitt is one of the core voices of the Goose, one of the core voices of the progressive faith movement. And for me personally, it would have been a huge hoe for you not to be here. And I'm so grateful that you're here. Thank you all so much. We're going to try to facilitate possible some question and answer a little bit. But yeah, I think you should give them all a hand and thank Doug especially for making that trip. Wow.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Hey, I did run into Judy, and she was coming one way with a walking stick, and I was going the other way with my crutch. And she said, we should start the community of the stick. So, Judy, hereby at this moment, we're starting the community of the stick. So anyone else that is using stick aids to get around while you're here, we should have a get-together at the campfire. Maybe we could have a healing service, throw them in there. I was really excited about this morning, and I did think a lot about why I wanted to get all the way from Minneapolis down here, and it was because I really wanted to talk to the two of you. Well, I'd like to talk to the two of you ever about anything we can, but I really want to talk to you about what we're going to talk about here this morning. And I know that not everybody knows the pedigrees of all of us, but I'm just going to say something briefly about it, raise the question, then ask you each to say something about what you do. We all do a lot of things in the world. We all pastor local churches that we're deeply embedded in. I'm in Minneapolis, in Denver, and in Dallas. Different traditions. We're not connected to each other by tradition or anything. We pastor in different ways, but there is almost no way to separate our lived lives and the work we're doing in the world from the communities that we're a part of. But we also all think about bigger issues in culture. We're public voices. We're writing books. We are trying to advocate for social change. We're taking on particular topics in our country. We're doing all this larger level social work as well. And that raises a curious question for me in my own life, and I want to talk about it with you, and then maybe you guys would describe some more of the work that you do while we get into this conversation. And that is, why do you stay embedded in the local context and not just give all of your effort to the bigger questions, the bigger social change questions taking place in our society and culture? Because we all know that, I mean, as much as you want to delegate in a community, we're still worried about Sunday comes, every 167 hours, another one starts up again, right? You finish and it comes again. Why are we worrying about that in addition to all these other things? Why does that matter? And then the coupled question to that is, why are we continuing to do this social work we want to do to create the more beautiful world that our heart knows is possible? Why do we keep doing that so deeply embedded inside the Christian narrative? We're all not just pastors, we're all Christian pastors, and we're working really hard to make sure that our lives, our communities, and our callings are happening inside the Christian narrative. And I know a lot of people that have just left both of those. They've left the local context, or they've left the particularity of the local Christian faith context for something wider. And frankly, sometimes it all seems really attractive. To walk out of both of those. So that's what I thought we'd talk about, and we would, so you can jump right into it now, talk a little bit about what you do. You both have very rich pedigrees that are super interesting to people, I think, to know the kind of work that you're up to and doing. And so,
Frank Schaeffer has this line, and it kills me that it's not my line, right? And I say it all the time, which is this. If what I wanted more than anything in the world was to be an atheist, the only thing I'd know to do is to just pray to God to make me one. Okay? That's about being Christian. But okay, so to the context. So I'm ordained in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and I started a church, as you did. Are you a church planter as well? Oh, so all three of us also started the church. I had to start a church I'd be willing to show up to, I think is what it comes down to, because I believe...
And a pastor you want to listen to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I believe in the gospel so fervently, and sometimes I feel like it's a shame that the only place you get to hear the gospel is in places, in contexts that I have to culturally commute to. I don't feel comfortable in most congregations. A lot of times they're friendly, but they're not actually welcoming. Like, those are two different things, being friendly and being welcoming. Anyway, so I wanted to be part of a Christian community, so I started one from scratch with 7 people in my living room 10 years ago, actually. And and the thing that made me a theologian and a preacher wasn't really seminary. The thing that made me a theologian and a preacher were the people in my care. Like, they really made me into the preacher and the pastor that they need me to be. So there's this interesting sort of symbiosis for me with my community, in that I become, in a certain way, the preacher they need. And so anything that I'm interested in or thinking about or writing about or speaking about, all of it originates in some way in my pastoral work. So I'm not clever. I'm not clever. I don't have some things out that I'm thinking of outside of things that have originated in my church context. So my job made me into who I am. I don't know how to say that, but and actually they have a tradition, because I'm very part-time now. There's a full-time clergy person who runs the church who I love with every fiber of my being, and so I'm gone a lot, but I'm always home Sunday for church. If I'm in the country, I'm there, right? I fly back for church. And people are like, well, why? And I'm like, because that's where I want to be. It's not out of guilt or I don't have enough days off to not be there. I'm not totally sure who I am or why I would have anything to say to anyone if I wasn't part of a worshiping community. So they've really just sort of made me into who I am. I don't know how else to say that.
First, I must say how delighted I am to have an opportunity to do the Goose and do it all with you, and just happy to be here today. Thank you so much. One of the most interesting questions that is usually posed to me is, what do you do? And it's always interesting to attempt to answer that question. And fundamentally, I begin by saying I'm humbled to serve as a pastor. And just a little bit about our context. We founded Joy Tabernacle AME Church 8 years ago. Within our context, which is North Texas region, amongst our denomination, AME Church, we are statistically the fastest growing AME Church. We're not breaking any world records, but we're the fastest growing AME Church. We're the first successful new church plant within our denomination in that region in over 40 years. Wow. And so there have been attempts, of course, over the decades, but usually after 3-4 years, they fizzled out. So that's an interesting dynamic. Also, although I have been pastoring, it's hard to believe this, I've been pastoring nearly 15 years, I'm still maybe the second youngest pastor within our denomination in the region. And depend on wherever you situate the generational numbers, I'm either a millennial or a real young Generation Xer. It just depends on how you situate that. Ultimately, I'm ontologically hip-hop. Hip-hop pulsates through my veins. It's what formed and shaped my mission, my understanding of theology. But at the same time, I am a child of the black church tradition. I am a fifth-generation ordained minister within the African Methodist Episcopal Church. My great-great-great-grandfather was one of the founders of Paul Quinn College, which is the oldest historically black college west of the Mississippi. My great-grandmother was the first woman ordained to pastor in the state of Texas. And so you got these kind of convergence happening between culture as well as tradition. Now, we try to do a lot of different things within our context, and I'll try to summarize this very quickly, but we're a church where you'll begin with a hymn, but halfway through service, we have a freestyle session because I have an in-church DJ that spins in the back. We are known, not only did an interview with the BBC, because one of our preaching series on Tupac went international. And at the same time, when we've had the protests against the Muslim ban, travel ban, we're there at DFW, not just myself, but my members and ministers. I guess most recently, people have recognized me and talked with me concerning my participation in July 7th in Dallas, where 5 officers were ambushed and killed. 9 were wounded along with 2 civilians. And I was one of the persons who was invited to speak at the peaceful rally and then later to marshal that march. And in fact, my wife, church members, others were there when the bullets began to fly. We ran, took cover, and ended up running for our lives in that experience. But I also had the unique experience last week, in fact, of the anniversary, not only of being invited to speak by the activists, which I reluctantly call myself a part of. I just think this is love, and love drives you for justice. But if you got to label it, call it activism. But not only be invited to MC the March Against Police Brutality, but I was also asked by the Officer Down Foundation and the police department if I would speak at the Dallas Memorial for the police. Not only that, was asked to be a part of the selection process for the next police chief of Dallas. So it's interesting dynamics that are swirling, both in terms of our multi-faith work. I co-chair Faith Forward Dallas, along with Imam Omar Suleiman and Rabbi Nancy Cass, and the work we're doing there. The hyper-localized work we're doing in South Dallas, which is one of the most impoverished communities in the city of Dallas. And then our work against police brutality and for justice in a number of different ways. And so on the side, I also get to do some professor stuff.
And your free time.
Because you're teaching at Perkins School of Theology, too.
I do adjunct there, but I've had a chance recently.
How about hobbies? Do you keep up any hobbies at all?
Yeah,
Are you keeping yourself busy?
I know. I guess, the greatest joy and really the motivation for all this work, of course, is our family. My family, my wife and our children, and the type of world we hope will be present when they come of age. But a lot of different things I'm happy to talk about, but we're having fun doing it.
I have a question for you, actually. I end up having to kind of reverse engineer my own congregation to be able to talk about it, because people have curiosity, like, why are people coming here? Why is it growing and other Lutheran churches aren't, right? So I have to reverse engineer it and figure it out, like sociologically almost. So can you speak to why it is that, what is it that's distinct? Because obviously you have one foot in tradition, AME tradition, right? But then you also have the innovation. So what is it you think about your congregation in AME Church that why do you think it's growing? Like, what are the aspects that are particular to it that you think are important?
It's a great question, and I tell people all the time that we did everything that you're not supposed to do in planning a church. We did it exactly the opposite way you're supposed to do it. Dallas is one of the fastest growing regions in America, second fastest growing, actually. Dallas makes more new millionaires than any other city in America, so there's plenty of money. And most people, when they come to Dallas, they come to North Dallas, into the sprawling northern suburbs. When we planted Joy, we went directly to the inner city, right to the most impoverished community, which most people say a church wouldn't be successful there, but that's where we went. Also, when you break down our church demographically, over 65%, really tipping towards 70% of our membership are either black millennials or like at that edge of Generation X as well. And we also have, quote unquote, Generation Z coming in strong as well, teenagers, early 20s. Which is a different dynamic than a lot of churches.
Do you have any elderly people?
We do. We have elderly. We have nurseries. We have all the way up to 80s and 90s years old, which would be interesting.
We have no elderly people. Do you have elderly people?
Well, the guy had a hip replacement, so I think we're really going to draw in that constituency now.
We just have my parents.
Targeted right at
So we had something called Generation Sunday last year, and it blew my mind. It literally asked everyone in the congregation for our services to wear a color that corresponded with their generation of birth. And our largest group for that particular Sunday were the millennials. The next group were the baby boomers, which shocked me, just blew my mind. But they're coming in strong. And usually it's baby boomers who no longer want to abide in the confines of traditionalism. They want to see their faith at work without restraint. And they find energy in this kind of intersection amongst generations as well. And so it's very phenomenal space. I guess another thing is most persons who come to our church did not grow up in the AME tradition. They're either new to faith or they're coming back.
That's the same with us. I mean, I think we have like 450 or 500 members. It's not a huge church, but maybe like 25 Lutherans.
Okay, so it's very common, and when we started Solomon's Porch in Minneapolis, it's not because I loved churches, right? It's not like I was committed to, we just need more of this thing is going so well. We just need to have more of these, right? Very similarly to your stories, it was there's something in us that needs to manifest in a way for us to stay involved and engaged and to share that more broadly with others that we think might possibly have some interest. That sort of thing. Now that you've been 8 years in, 10 years in, we're 17 years in, what keeps you going at that local context? Because in one sense, you pulled it off. You pulled off house, 10 years, check it off, you're done. You pulled it off, you got the people. Now you've got a rising platform and a rising voice and a larger social impact. Why do you want to stay in that? And then if you want to transition some of that, if there's anything about this staying Christian at the same time. So something about, and then I want to talk about some other topics, but why, what is it about staying in the local context 8 years, 10 years, 17 years?
Well, I'm basically unemployable. So that's one of I had to create a job in order to have a job. That's part of it. For me, oh God, it sounds so cheesy, but it's love. I mean, it's because I love these people, and they actually love me. Not because I'm Nadia Bolz-Weber. Despite the fact that I'm Nadia Bolz-Weber, they love me. And I've disappointed them, and they love me. And, I've walked through all these things in these people's lives, and I learn from them, and they make me, they re-catechize me through their lives. Just observing their lives re-catechizes me. And, I don't know. also, the reason I love them is not because I'm big-hearted. It's theological to me. I think God desires for God's people to be loved by their pastors. And so it feels like God does that Grinch thing with my heart all the time, So this thing is created in me, and I just feel like I'd wither without it. Also, I just don't know if I'd have any faith if I wasn't a preacher. I feel like that's what creates having to dig for the gospel, scrounge. I have to it's such a vigorous reconnoitering, to be able to find good news, because I want to be able to preach good news, not information, not work, not here's some more work for you. I have to find good news for these people who are the activists in Denver. These are people who are, I describe it as they're holding the world's most broken realities together with Scotch tape during the week, and they need a space where they're the broken thing, where they can be the broken thing that's tended to, so that they can hear some good news, really good news. They can be absolved for not even living up to their own political ideals during the week, right? Whatever it is that to find that good news, the gospel for them, is what creates faith in me, because it appears for them every week. And it makes me believe in God, and it makes me see the power of the gospel working in their lives. So I just think I'd be a worse person if I wasn't a parish pastor. And I'm already not a great person.
I had to tell very quickly another aspect of our story, which is since October, we've actually been a multi-campus church. We were asked by our bishop, Bishop Vashti Murphy McKenzie, for anybody out there who knows of her and her work, to adopt a nearly century-old congregation that was near foreclosure, and to, really to aid in recovering that ministry and grafting it into the ministry of joy. And so we've been doing that now for several months, which has been a wonderful dynamic to have now Agape Temple as one of our missional campuses. And that was a older congregation as well, although they had built a brand new sanctuary less than 10 years ago. And so that's been a wonderful journey. But to answer your question, long time ago in hip-hop, for those of you hip-hop fans, the way in which to get on, the way in which to gain respectability was to have a imprint within your community, and your community investing its energies in raising you up. Your community locally legitimized your work as something worth exposing and celebrating. I find an unfortunate dynamic today, and I think it's aided probably by the advent of technology, that so many people quickly go nationally and internationally in their work, and they have no imprint or commitment to their local community. And so another way of saying that is a good friend of mine who has a radio station. He says as a tagline, if it ain't local, it ain't live. So how can I go out and demand and fight for justice nationally and I'm silent at home? How can I work on matters of poverty across the country or police brutality across the country and don't say anything about what's happening in my own back door? And so, we know all these names, particularly in the Black Lives Matter movement, of Michael Brown and Tamir Rice, all these names that have grabbed the national consciousness. But Fred Bradford Jr. was an African-American man who was run over by a police cruiser just down the street from my congregation. And that officer, although he broke this man's back in 3 places, cracked all of his ribs, handcuffed him and called him a nigger while he was on the ground, was released of all charges by a jury of his peers. So why would I spend more time advocating for Mike Brown or Tamir Rice and not speak about Jordan Edwards, who only on April of 29th of this year was shot in the head in Balch Springs, just outside of Dallas, while being guilty of riding in a vehicle away from a party? And I've gotten to know the Edwards family. We hosted the very first visual and direct action training on our Agape campus. We had Sean King, the former president now the NAACP, Cornell William Brooks, come to town. We did that at our congregation. And so we understand our work locally, right? to be the foundation. One of the things I love about Dr. King, and I'll wrap this part up, is that if you ever ask Dr. King, you look at his writings about how he defined himself, despite any acclaim or reach that he garnered, he would say, I'm just a pastor. I'm a Baptist pastor. That's what identified. That was a part of his ethos. And so for me, it's all intertwined, it's all shaped, but it stands on, I pray, the firm foundation of what we do locally.
Well, that's a great transition to this next part I'd love for us to talk a little bit about, and that is the role of what it means to be a pastor. Because we're all battling the two pressures, the public theologian pastor, the public spokesperson, the one that says things to the world, and then the one that says things to the people that are at Joy Tabernacle, at House, at Solomon's Porch, like the people we know. It's interpersonal conversation sometimes just as much as it is broad. And for some people, I think in our two traditions, me coming from an evangelical tradition and you being from a Lutheran tradition, I think maybe a little different than the AME. You could tell me, but maybe not. There's a lot of pressure to be like politically neutral. Don't speak on those topics. I mean, maybe a couple of things about a food program every now and again. But pastor, don't step out of your lane. And hearing you describe the detail to which you understand the racial dynamics and the police abuse in Dallas is at the level of an activist that I think would surprise a lot of other clergy, maybe even other AME clergy who would know that. So we're all battling this thing, right? I just recently was arrested in Washington, D.C. on the steps of the Supreme Court and had to go to jail in this big trial. And a lot of people in my life were like, hey, why is a pastor advocating against executions in this country? Like, kind of why is that your thing? And I'm like, well, I think I come from a tradition that's been against execution since AD 33. Like, I think we've been trying to say that we've been killing the wrong people for a long...
we should kill the right people now.
I said that to the judge. Well, the idea that we think there's anybody that's the right person to kill, right? That's the whole problem. I said that AD 33 line to the judge, and he didn't laugh either. But so I don't expect people to laugh at that. But you see what I'm getting at? This role of the pastor and writing books and being a voice of women leaders who have broken the mold. Now, I don't know if you've ever wanted to be that, Nadia. I've known you a long time and all the things you've been in. I don't know if that was something you wanted to take on, but that's a mantle that landed at your feet. I don't know if you've wanted every mantle that's been handed to you recently. I certainly haven't wanted every. But you take them when they're handed to you, and then it starts to change that dynamic. How are you feeling and how are you doing in this work of being a public theologian as well as the other people you were trained? Because I'm guessing all three of us weren't trained to be public theologians in the same way that we were trained to do some of the other things we do.
Yeah, I think everyone has a different sense of calling and vocation in this. Like, I don't feel like here's the right thing for pastors to do in the world. Mine's really particular. Mine is just pastoral in the sense of, like, pastoring activists, right? Like that's my role. And so if I'm going to show up somewhere at a march, at a protest, in the courthouse, at a gathering at Shorter AME that is talking about policing, all of this, when I show up to these things, it's because me showing up to these things is a pastoral thing for my people, because that's where they are. So that's, now, not everyone's going to be like that. Some pastors are going to really feel like they're called to some activism that's going to push their community. My community pushes me. So if I'm going to mention something that's going on in the world, in my preaching, the reason I do it is because to do it is a pastoral thing for the people in my care. So that's my guiding deal with all of this. But truly, they're the ones leading me with this stuff rather than the other way around, I would say.
I think out of my tradition, it's a little different. There's so many within the AME Church who have been steeped in justice. And even in my own family narrative, my grandfather marched with Thurgood Marshall. Was almost lynched in Mississippi. And one story that I tell about my grandfather often, and it's also in my latest book, Stakes is High, was that because of his work with the NAACP, he received a visit directly to his home by the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. And my grandfather, which is the most extraordinary man I've ever known, invited the Klansmen in for coffee, sat him down in his living room, fixed his coffee, and informed him, I'm not going anywhere. And so that type of persistence and determination, I think, is something that's been passed down through the genes. Now, what I think catches most people off guard is not so much in the areas of justice work as defined as those things impacting black life, but my work as it relates to multi-faith. I think that's what trips people up the most when they consider me. I'm one of the only black pastors probably in America to say that they've been given the Community Leader of the Year award by the Council on American and Islamic Relations. But because of our work and engagement, our understanding of intersectionality, I see in their story our story. Yes. The type of terrorism that's happening at mosques, particularly within our region, reminds me of the terror that happened at our church at Charleston, South Carolina, Mother Emanuel. Right. And until you've made pilgrimage to Mother Emanuel, it's still somewhat distant from you. But I've been there physically to see the holes in the walls and in the floors, which are the bullets that miss bodies. I know personally individuals whose mothers were shot 8 times at point blank range, right? And so you see this connection historically between the terrorization of black communities, households, and centers of worship, as is what's happening with my friends, my brothers and sisters in the Islamic faith. And one of the things that has hurt me the most or been the most discouraging to me, frankly, is that more within the black religious tradition have not vocalized their concern for the persecution of our Muslim brothers and sisters. I believe the black church has been silent, almost impotent, as it relates to Islamophobia. And I believe there is a call upon God for all of us to stand up and speak out, because particularly that's such a part of our narrative. So that's my expression. That's my feel. I think on the justice, people expect you as black pastors to be involved in voting rights, to be involved in police brutality, be involved in poverty, not so much in terms of battling Islamophobia. But those are the things I believe that God has called us to do, and we're trying to be faithful to do it.
Is there anything in particular that for you either sits really heavy right now in our situation we find ourselves in the summer of 2017, or anything that feels really, really growing and hopeful and uplifting? Is there something? And it can be grand, it can be specific, but is there something on either of those? And I'm trying not to set them as binaries because they might be the same thing, they might be linked to each other. But is there something growing in you that just feels like it's a heaviness that's coming, and the worry's high, or something that is really giving you that movement?
Well, I have 2 things. One is that there's just the very, very finest little tiny edge peeking out that we're beginning to sort of peel away the reality of white supremacy in our country and in our culture in a way that I hope continues for me and for my congregation and for our culture at large. It's very hard. It's becoming more difficult for that to be concealed for people. So I feel like that. I was in Australia a few days ago, and whenever I travel abroad, people ask about gun laws in the States, right? It's because to other countries that it's insane, right? All they see is like, here are the number of deaths by guns in your country, and here are the laws about guns in your country. It's not ideology, it's math, right? It's just, here are the numbers, right? And so they're like, we got an American in front of us. We're going to ask her about. So they question about that, and then also the death penalty. These 2 things. I get asked about, like, I have to represent this shit in other countries when I travel, or sort of make an account for it. And the only thing I can think to say is that I don't see these 2 things changing until we really deal with the white supremacy issue, because I think both of them stem from that. Because I don't think you can build a castle to live in economically for white people that's built on the bodies of enslaved black people and the genocide of Native people. Like, we came by this by some dishonest fucking means, right? So I just don't. And I think that psychically, we know that, and we're afraid of it. This is why it's concealed, because on some level we know it's true, and that feels dangerous. The truth of that feels so dangerous to us. We have to have guns to protect ourselves from people who look like the people we stole shit from, right? So to me, I think that we have to be able to kill them both in our homes or the streets or in the jails. So I think that the reason that we have the death penalty and we have the gun laws that we have is because of that. And that shit will not change until you have to deal with the thing under the thing. And we're not doing that. And so the fact that it's peeking out from underneath a tiny bit right now gives me a little hope. And then, so that's the first thing. And then the second thing I'm absolutely obsessed with is sex, because I'm writing a book about it. And I'm trying to write a body-positive, sex-positive book from a Christian perspective that includes a theology of pleasure. And so I'm interviewing, and I'm limiting the scope because I'm just writing about my own stories and the stories of the people in my parish. That's it. So if there aren't people in my parish with those stories, they aren't being told. So I'm limiting it. But I'm interviewing my parishioners and saying, what messages did you receive from the church about sex and the body? How did that affect you? And how in the world have you navigated your life as an adult? And those stories are like breaking me. And these are some stories in one parish. And so the effect of purity culture and of rape culture, which are very related, and of and the modesty and the whole, like, the only thing God blesses is sex in this one tiny condition, you know. If you happen to have waited for marriage and you're monogamous and you're married, preferably to people of the same race. We don't say that out loud, but that's probably part of it. And you're both Christian, you know, and if you look at the whole planet of human beings, the people who fit in that circle, like, if that's God's plan, God planned poorly. You know what I'm saying? That is like, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's so to go, the only way that you can experience pleasure, that you can sort of live into this aspect of human flourishing that we're given as created beings, is if you fit in that. Fuck that. I don't believe it.
What has given me the most hope over the last year has been the opportunity to horrify white rich people. As we've been touring the nation, the majority of the people we have spoken before have been white people in very affluent backgrounds who are beginning to see, as Dr. King taught us long ago, that we're tied together in this single garment of destiny. No longer are they comfortable living in their citadels of privilege while just across the street or across the city or across the region, there are black and brown people who are continuing to suffer as a part of the narrative of this nation. And I respect that there are so many people who are opening themselves up to see what you can never unsee and to feel what you can never forget, and are now beginning to graft in their story to this very long story of racialized violence. Just last week, I had the opportunity to preach 4 services for a church in Fairfax, Virginia. Fairfax, Virginia, for those of you in the D.C. area, you know, is one of the wealthiest counties really in America. And to be in this space, and this is my second time with them in the last 4 months, and to be able to tell them the story of Mother Emanuel, to tell them the story of Jordan Edwards, to tell them the stories of pain and suffering, not just as some type of voyeurism into the black pain experience, but really to challenge them, to challenge their understanding of spirituality, gives me a lot of hope. I don't think that you can be changed until you are free to be broken. And when you allow your heart to be broken, God can then create that heart anew. please always understand that the greatest critique against the church in America has always been its vocalized silence. How it has always found a way not to speak up and to speak out and to be active as people are suffering. And so it does bring me hope for persons who could very readily run behind their money and run into their walled neighborhoods to say no longer will we do this, and we want to be a part of the working of a greater day. But I think the other thing that gives me hope, I wrote about it in my book, I recently wrote about an article for Pathos, is our understanding of intersectionality. And that's not a new word, that's not a new identity, but people are starting to really understand this thing, that injustice anywhere really is a threat to justice everywhere. Yeah. And recognizing that even as I'm working on this cause, because it's justice, it intersects with that cause as well. Right. And so it's been exciting in Dallas, because I believe Dallas is now in the midst of movement. If you know the history of Dallas, the black church establishment was co-opted by the white business establishment during the 50s and 60s, and the voice was silent. So now, just now, I believe we're in the midst of movement. And it is amazing to see the same people who show up to march against police brutality, who also show up for immigrants' rights and for refugees, who also show up for Islamophobia, who also show up for workers' rights, because we're beginning to recognize that we'll only have victory to the extent that we're willing to stand and work together shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Well, I will say the two of you are the kinds of people that actually give me hope, and that's both specifically and generally. I agree completely with your take in that you say these things and present yourselves in the world and available the way you do. That more events like this happen. It's great. I'm really worried about a pending economic collapse. Just sort of on a separate note, I've become a full-on economic leftist, so it's all freaking me out. It's just a Ponzi scheme. It isn't going to work. At some point, it's going to collapse. And so I
heard the question, but I'm black in America. It can't get worse than it's already been. So there's not anything going on now that hadn't horrified me before, right?
Yeah, well, we're
just trying to work forward to a new day.
It's scary, isn't it? It's scary. There's a lot coming. Nadia is going to leave right when we're done here. So your chance to connect with her is going to be limited. Michael and I are both going to be in there's an open tent, which is one of the other stages. We're going to be presenting in there over the next couple of days. I help to manage and organize and coordinate that tent. So I'll be sort of hanging around there. Michael's got a book signing that's going to happen over here. But we have like 4 minutes left in this time. If somebody wants to come to that microphone right there and either say something to this whole crowd, or you want to make a comment or a question for us to respond. Yeah, you got it? Okay, yeah.
I'm sorry to everybody else who didn't get up here first. I have to ask, as someone who's very liberal, surrounded by very conservative individuals who see the white male as supreme, how do I, as a pastor, influence these people and make a difference in their lives? And that's it.
You do it with a level of courage, because that's what it's going to require. I'm beginning to really recognize in my own study just how embedded the notions of white supremacy are within the white psychology. And it really is a colonized space that you have to liberate. And you recognize that so much, frankly, so many white people have so much invested in their whiteness that to remove it is to remove the very system that gives them reality, that supports their sense of being. And so they see anything that decolonizes the mind as a harm to their existence. And I want to applaud, I really do mean that, because I fairly frequently get calls from white allies who are pastors for affirmation, because when they took a stand for justice, the people who they serve, who say they love Jesus, don't seem to love Jesus very much, and really want to run them out on the rails. And so it is a very lonely space, and I want to acknowledge it, and I think it's important to be white and woke, and to recognize that we have to transform the entire system for justice. But you have to do it, to be faithful to your call, and to recognize, and I guess at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself who employs you. Is it the church or is it God? If it's God who has given you the call, if it's God who's given you the mantle, even when the institution rejects you, God welcomes you and draws you in. Do we want the applause of congregants, or do we want the heavens to rejoice in our faithfulness? And if it is the latter, we will press forward towards justice. There's no blueprint for this, right? It's about proximity to pain. It's about opening eyes. But at the end of the day, hearts must be transformed. And I will say that it's a lot of hard work, but I want to applaud you. Will you please applaud him? I want to applaud those who are willing and have the courage to do so. Thank you very much.
I only lead by self-incrimination. I mean, that's all I really have to offer, is that I guess I'm willing to speak the truth about my own struggles with stuff. And that a lot of times invites people into a less defensive space. It's a form of leadership I call, screw it, I'll go first.
Your imagery of being surrounded is a powerful one. Another way to think of that is that you're embodied there. It's not an accident that you're there. And I would encourage you and all of us to use the full gamut of the human communication capacities. Passion, humor, interpersonal, public. Use it all. Sometimes when things get really serious, different ones of us pick, when the topic is very serious and the consequences are high, the stakes high, we pick a certain modality to deal with that. And sometimes our communities get used to us doing that. And utilizing another modalities and other ways are what open us up as full human beings to one another. So. All right. Hey, thanks a lot for coming. Maybe you just wanted to sit in the shade, but we're just glad that anybody was out there at all. So Nadia's got to go. Michael and I, we're going to be around, and I think we're turning the stage over to somebody else.
Thanks, Doug.
Is that what we do?
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.